a lot of political aspects to it because in the United States, something that he didn't know at the time, because there's no internet, there's no way to actually, and family members aren't going to talk about the nuances and the propaganda that's going on while they're over there. That's just that's just not something you do. Military families do, because you're potentially undermining the person's convictions while they're in a combat zone. That could kill them. So there's but there's a lot of, in hindsight, really, as somebody who has had uncles that had to go and fight in Vietnam. In hindsight, it that was that whole conflict was, you know essentially, it was a proxy war with Russia, because the Vietnam, because all throughout Asia at that time, communism was spreading. Joseph Stalin and Mao and stuff like that was just pushing it on them.
Yeah.
And it was really,
Militant atheistic communism, if I may add correctly.
yes. But, well, I don't actually think that there's any difference between the two, to be honest. Like I don't see how, I don't see anything but communism being a militant atheistic movement, at least in the
Well, I
way
mean,
it
right
was.
now, at least right now, it's more Christian, and like Vladimir Putin is a born again Christian, um, and he's been called, out for some of his militant Christian ideas. So I mean, it seems communism has gotten more religious.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that Russia in its current state is actually communist. I don't think Putin is trying to make another USSR right now.
Yeah,
Right now, what Russia is doing is just trying to keep its small stake of oil that it has, which is in Syria. Syria. I mean, there's a lot of politics behind that too, because
yeah,
Iraq would, Saddam would be, selling through Assad, to Russia, his oil that he wasn't supposed to sell to anybody in the UN, due to UN sanctions for trying to, take over Kuwait, essentially, which is not something you want to actually talk to an Iraqi about, because they actually really see how indoctrinated those Iraqis were against the Kuwaitis, because you talk about the Kuwait War to an Iraqi in Iraq, and they have opinions on it it's that is not correct.
yeah.
It's factually not correct, and then you talk to what did you learn in school about certain aspects, and it's like the meme, Hitler did nothing wrong. Well, the Iraqis were actually taught Hitler did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh no, it's just, these things are crazy with that. I mean, it's a good thing Hillary wasn't successful and he was a buffoon, or, he could have done more damage.
well,
You
I mean,
know.
he was leader for like what, 40 years, 30 years, something like that,
I mean,
since the
well, I mean, the
60s.
thing is, I mean, he was good at he was good at politics. He knew how to control the masses, and part of that he did by manipulating religion. You know, and for the most part, no one believed him. Like the real religious people, there were plenty of theologians and devout Christians that died at the hands of Hitler and stuff. So I mean, it was all talk with him. He very much manipulated the masses with his religious talks.
Well, he
He,
he manipulated the masses, not just with his religious talks. He would actually execute Jews and Christian farmers who never left never left Iraq, who didn't have any way of contacting outside of Iraq. He would
Mhm.
execute them for being CIA and Israeli spies on, on not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. Whenever something went wrong, and he had to blame somebody, he'd blame the
Mhm.
Christians and be like, this is an American CIA agent. He would do the same thing with the Sunnis too, because he claimed to be a Shiite. Um,
Mhm.
even though he passed laws that were very un-Islamic, like he allowed um, he allowed for drinking within Iraq. He didn't go the full Sharia law.
Mhm.
Iraq wasn't Sharia law based. The law in Iraq was
Mhm.
it was weird. The way
Yeah.
the way he structured the legal system and stuff, it was just weird. It was Arab socialism. Um, that's what it was. That's what the Ba'ath Party was officially was called, Arab socialism, and
Mhm.
it was just like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
It's when you see that type of suffering, it's just like, you can't take anybody that's in the West says that they're oppressed seriously. It's like, no, no, you haven't lived 20 plus years malnutritioned, you know and having to work in fields and in a desert environment where you grow nothing, and that may be because you have like barrels of or something that is buried in your farm. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's just so much of that. It seems like everyone wants to be a victim these days. It's like the new trend. If you're not a victim, then you're an oppressor. And no one wants to be the oppressor, so everyone just wants to be the victim.
Well, that's just basic Marxism right there.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, you know, I don't actually see that. I don't just because people are shitty towards me, and I am in return shitty towards them because that's just how I am. That doesn't mean I'm being oppressed or I'm oppressing somebody. That just means that I'm not following what my my uh principles should
Religious. Yeah.
be. I'm going outside of my principles when I treat people as badly as they treat me in some cases. Um, but I'm not oppressing anybody by doing that, and they're not oppressing me by doing that. We're just being human beings and reacting, you know, like human
Well,
beings react.
you have to keep in mind that even Jesus Christ called people names.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not
He
saying.
especially had a he especially had a thing for the Pharisees.
But he also had some harsh words for the Sadducees too. I mean,
Yeah.
he had harsh words for a lot of people, but it's he was also that was also his purpose. Even if you don't believe that he was God made flesh, essentially, um,
Mhm.
you know, he 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 was still working as a prophet. He was still trying to do the prophet's work of because each and every prophet, right?
Mhm.
Before Jesus and everything, each and every prophet, they've been their whole shtick was to actually guide Judaism. um, whenever because you look at the historical record of the kingdom of Israel during certain prophetic times, and the descriptions of it, and it's like, okay, well, there's obviously something wrong going there. you know um there's several, like I think there is like six different civil wars um
Mhm.
before 70 AD. And
Yeah.
I mean, the 70 AD war was called the third Jewish Civil War, but I mean, there's you look at if you look at the Bible as partially historical, which it is, it there was several other Jewish civil wars.
I believe Max Kolbe got it right. The Bible is full of historical and spiritual truths.
Yes, yes.
Um,
There's and
it requires deep study in order to get it.
Yeah, I mean the Old Testament is very very much the his the history of the Jews as much as it is a spiritual document. It's history of the dual monarchy essentially, and but because by the time 70 A.D. came around, which was I think the second. That was when the Romans came in and took Jerusalem and changed its name to Aelis Copula or something like that. Changed and changed the Israel to Syria and Judea to Palestine. Um, that's essentially what happened. Just to thumb, it seemed like it would have been a just a minor roadblock, but if it was just a minor roadblock, why would they insult the people there but not actually change Egypt in such a dramatic way? Because that was the road to Egypt, and they would just you know that was their main goal was Egypt, was conquering Egypt during that march. But it was why would they actually do that kind of insult if wasn't some if they weren't at least a you know I'm not saying that they were like this big huge empire, but they were at least big enough to be the vassal states of Egypt and the Persian um, empire. They were big enough to actually control in the place of the Persian empires and the Egyptian empires, which couldn't actually send, official parts of their government. They just let the Jews, um, control the Arabian Peninsula. Um, like Yemen was, controlled by a Taliesin, was controlled by Judeans essentially, and then on the other side of Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is, that was Israelites. It's a very interesting part of history that isn't really delved into that much.
From my studying of the Old Testament, because I find that to be fascinating, is you know, you have to really, in order to understand it, you have to get into the culture of the time. When you take it, I would say in a literalistic sense, I think you miss out so much on the history, and you're depraving yourself of learning.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
most definitely. I mean, that's one of the
yeah,
reasons
and
why I lean towards Greek Orthodoxy, because it's to the Greek Orthodox way to actually read the Bible is to go, you know, historical record, science of the time, then text. Like you're supposed to learn about the culture of the time, what common knowledge was at the time, what the scientific common knowledge was, what the scientific common knowledge of the elites were, and then then you read it, and then everything makes it makes more sense that way. I'm sorry for interrupting.
it is fine. You know, if you want to be, if it sounds funny about how I actually got into the escaping atheism project. Um, I've had my dealings with annoying atheists, still do, and I kind of enjoy it for the most part. I like pointing out BS. And how it's funny is how I actually got into the project was by a Mr. Tim O'Neill, the amateur historian, who runs who runs the website correcting atheists on bad history. Um, what was funny is like I was wanting to find material about atheist bad history, and he recommended me Borden Painter's book, The Atheist Denial of History, and he recommended me Max's channel, his old channel, Escaping Atheism. But he of course warned me that it was a Christian apologetic channel. But he said the interview was fine, and so
Tim
I watched it.
Tim O'Neill said this. Really, that's
Yeah.
weird. I mean, we've never actually said we were Christian apologists. Actually, me and Max fought about that in the beginning of the project because it was at the time I was really into Milo Yiannopoulos, and I was trying to be like, well, the because as far as apologetics go, that's almost completely evangelical run. Orthodox apologia doesn't actually exist. So it's like, as far as defending the faith and what apologetics should be, because anybody can be an apologetic.
Well, I mean, if you define apologist as someone that is defending a specific position, like which I think is the dictionary definition of an apologist, then Richard Dawkins is technically an apologist. He's an atheist apologist. He's also an angry one at that. So he's an angry atheist apologist. So AAA. Um, you know,
Yeah, but
with,
I mean, I'm just, it's just surprising that O'Neill would actually recommend the channel to somebody, because as far as I knew, Tim O'Neill, that's actually kind of flattering.
I don't think he was really much of anything. I think he said, well, Board and Painter did an interview, check the interview out, but try not to really, not to care about the Christian apologetic side or something like that of it, and just listen to Painter. I think that was kind of the point he was getting across. So I eventually checked it out, and I became very interested in the channel, and I said, what the hell, I'll subscribe. And, I eventually found out that we had a Facebook page. I got more involved, and eventually I found myself a member, and it's been sort of a blast since I've done it. I've posted memes, I've posted critiques of atheists such as Sean Carroll. I've done one on Lawrence Krauss. I plan on doing one in the future with Matt Dillahunty. I might actually do one and put it on my channel. I know I did one with Sam Harris where I think I did a very thorough job of completely, annihilating him.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you with that. I mean, I did enjoy the Sam Harris videos on your channel. It was really good.
Because it's really quite fair. I mean, he gets paraded about that he is a neuroscientist and that he is a philosopher. Case point, he has never wrote a philosophical paper. He's openly encouraged in his book, that he does not, he's not into reading philosophy because he thinks it's boring. And and philosophers generally think he's pretty sucky at philosophy. So he is not the go-to person to be called a philosopher.
Well, not only that, the isn't the neuro whatever PhD he has, isn't that just honorary?
Well, it's a funny point about that. Sam Harris is a rich boy. His dad was an actor and his mom was like a TV producer, like a TV show executive or something like that. So he was legitimately made in money. And he's pretty much gone his whole life being made with money. And his PhD came partly from the fact of his own business, and when you look it up, he actually did not even do the experiment that got him his PhD. And and even if we considered it legitimate, which if you look at statisticians, William Biggs, he says, and I quote, it's garbage. The the two papers that he wrote, like that had experiments done to them, was about religion and morality, and they made constant reverse inference fallacies in general, along with a bunch of other stupid mistakes that should have really gotten them disqualified. And so, I mean, he hasn't done anything of reputable um, my knowledge of neuroscience. So, let me get this straight. His PhD, he did not do the actual experiments. The experiment in themselves were horrible. And he has ultimately done nothing of use with the information that he did from that experiment. So, on what grounds can you really say that he is a neuroscientist? He's simply a guy with a degree in neuroscience that has done nothing about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but and you can say that about a lot of people. A lot of people that are, failed scientists and failed, you know, go into atheist activism or some kind of activism. I mean, you have certain failed neuroscientists that go into the when it's feminism, for example, and you can see that there's failed law students that did
It's failed historians.
failed historians. I
I
mean,
mean, if you pretty much you take all the failures and you put them into one group, you got about maybe a good 70% of the atheist activists.
yeah, I mean,
At some point, I think I honestly don't know if they have I know they have a recruiting method, but I would typically think that they would look for more qualified people. But you also have to see that atheism is a pretty small group, so they have to take what they can get.
well, and then you look at if you look at like new atheism and specifically, that's even a smaller number because it just seems to be led by people that are very very much militant anti-theists. You
Yeah,
their anti-theism, specifically anti-Christian, Christian, is what drives them. It
yeah.
is the conclusion, the pre-made conclusions that they have come to, that they try to argue is correct.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of like the what really drew me to this project, the Escaping Atheism Red Pill Religion project, was excuse me, sorry, was that this over time, right, from the
Mhm.
60s, until now, atheism seemed to try to social engineer, like they don't want to live in a society where religion is seen as good and as valid enough to be part of society and be part of politics. They really do not want that at all.
That's the First Amendment.
Well, yeah, I mean, but they completely um they've worked the separation of church and state since the 60s.
Well,
And
I mean, if you think about it, Stalin was very much against church and state, although he kind of took it to a very extreme level. The separation between church and state under Stalin was done with guns and cannons and bombs.
well, yeah, but I mean, it's is it really, if you pervert an idea that is a founding principle of a nation, how is that any different, really? other than people not dying for it.
Yeah.
People not dying, people not getting killed and murdered in the streets, yes, but it's how is that any different? It's a violent coup, and a bloodless coup is still a coup.
Yeah.
you know, it,
Well, I always found it funny that a lot of atheists will say that Stalin wasn't a true atheist, which, as we all know, is the no true Scotsman fallacy. But, the thing is, like, on one hand, like, they seem to be inconsistent because, you know, in order to say that Stalin is not an atheist, you have to actually have some tenets to atheism from which you can say that he does not follow. If there is no such tenets, then how can he be against any of them? I mean, with
yeah, I
with
mean,
with Christianity, there's a lot of things that are allowed, but after a certain point, if you ignore enough doctrines, you butcher enough things, or you take things to certain levels, people will not hesitate to say you're not a Christian. You may think you are, but you're really a heretic. We can know you're a heretic, if you break certain guidelines. But if atheism, as they say, is nothing, then there is legitimately nothing Stalin could break that could say he is not an atheist.
that is completely true. I agree with that. Um, it's 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 just messed up because have you ever seen the Stalin quote meme about the book? Um,
Um,
all right. Here's the story. It is a story about somebody who supposedly was either friend of Stalin or met Stalin, right? And he goes up to this guy and he goes, "I have a book. Let me share with you a book that will make you not believe in God anymore." And he hands him the book on of by Charles Darwin.
Evolution,
Yeah, and
the origin of species.
yeah, the origin of species, and you know that was actually that is actually a meme because there is a quote. There are several quotes attributed to Joseph Stalin that talks about him going around and showing him the origin of species to people to make them into atheists, and it's just funny.
Yeah. So he was kind of an evangelical atheist, and
And
his
and
Bible of choice was a book of Charles Darwin.
yep, who was a Christian, whose theory, his Origin of Species book did not make him not a Christian. It's he you know he
I was, there's a quote of him that that says he was mainly agnostic, or he was like a weak deist. Um, which he never wanted to really come out and say he was an atheist, from as far as I know. Um, and here's what's the funny thing: early on in Charles, like many young Earth creationists, like to believe that this was, the problem between evolution and the Bible was this grandstanding thing that's happened ever since the beginning. No, that's not true. We know that's not true because Charles. There's plenty of quotes from Charles Darwin that where Charles Darwin specifically says, and I quote, "One can be an ardent theist and an evolutionist." And Charles Darwin had friends that were theists who embraced evolution
oh yeah, I mean
during his time frame. So I mean, this it's not like, ever since Darwin, came up with the theory that, Christians have been against it. No, it was widely accepted at first. I mean, well, of course any any theory in science has to go through its rigors before it's considered widely accepted. But I mean, it was not like hated or met by negative press by Christians by the most part.
Well, yeah, because it's the idea that we are created instantly is not one that many people. It's not a historical Christian or Jewish perspective.
I
It's
don't know if you read. I don't know if you read the. I'm trying to think of the word for the church found like the early Christians, the early Christian people like Eusebius,
pre-Nicene pre-Nicene Creed or post-Nicene Creed. When you talk
um
about the early
like
church,
fourth
there's
century,
okay. So
um like you get a quote from Basil, and Basil, from in reading Genesis 120, he says something that sounds, I believe I got the quote up, but he basically says, why does the birds, why do the birds, um, in the come after the fish or something along those lines? And he says that they both share like a common family link, and they have it. They share a similar common derivation. That was Basil in the fourth century, and so I mean, you have this quote from Basil, a Christian that predates Darwin by thousands of years, by about like 1,400 years, I think.
and then you also have the Jewish scholars who use the Talmud and like who created a mathematical equation essentially from using Talmud and Torah that predicted the Earth's age around 13 billion years old, way before carbon dating was ever invented, or until before the age. It was just like because they're trying to figure out the how long 7 days was to God. Because the Jewish theology on that is God does not experience time the same way as
Well, I mean, here's what I always found funny about this, and I say this to young Earth creationists too. What is time to a timeless being? Like, to God, I would imagine a second is the same as 1,000 years or, 50,000 years. Like, time is not a thing that God knows of. He creates it, but he is not affected by it.
well, it's actually pretty close to what you said. A one day is approximately like 1.3 billion years or something like that. I forget. Whatever is multiplied by 7, that gets pretty close to 13 billion. Um, it's weird when you actually read those texts because the concept of billion is relatively industrial age. It's pre-industrial age. 1,000 was a huge number, and it's they didn't really have a concept for million until like into the Middle Ages. So
Yeah.
when I say 13 billion, I'm taking I'm taking my perception of how they actually came across words and just modernizing it
Yeah.
because
And like another thing you have to realize is that like I've actually done, some of the ages myself, but when you do the ages in Genesis, they all follow, like almost all of them follow base 60, sexagismal. Like they follow the Sumerian base 60 formula. Um,
well, yeah, I
you
mean
know,
the Sumerian culture was huge. That was a huge empire. That spanned, from the tip of the from the Arabian Peninsula up to Iraq before the Persians took over. Um, that was a big, that was a pretty big empire. That was,
And you have to consider this too, like to the Jews of the time, numbers, were sacred, not because they actually represented like, what we would think of as a year, but because the number themselves, symbolize something like a flag or, like they were symbolisms of sacred, sacredness of God.
that is a very simplistic way to put it. I mean, numerology itself is a very complicated study. Jewish numerology, and in particular, each and every single separate number has an actual meaning to it. It's like the number 13. Like you'll see Jewish numerology in the New Testament a lot, and I'm surprised that Christians by large haven't really caught on to it. Number 13 symbolizes love, redemption, um, and
And when Jesus the
forgiveness.
day that Jesus got crucified.
It is the number of Metatron. Um, there was all, including Jesus. There is 13. There's 13
You said
principles.
Metatron, right?
Yes, yes. The
I thought
voice.
for a minute you said Megatron.
No, Metatron. The voice of God, essentially the angel that was that spoke the angel that actually spoke to Moses, that put him into the rock when God fully made himself visible, so that Moses wouldn't die. That was Metatron, according to according to Jewish theology, and his number is 13, and all the principal characters, minus the females, the female characters, all the principal characters add up to 13. You add in, the Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, and the whore that washed Jesus' feet. She's a secondary. Yeah, she's
People
not.
always find people, some
But,
I've noticed some even Catholics they try to attribute that whore that washes Jesus' feet as Mary, but that's not true.
well, I mean, that was actually stated by a pope, and then another pope went back and said that pope was wrong,
Yeah.
because Mary Magdalene, there's actually no story of her in the New
Only appeared like three or
Testament.
four times in the New Testament at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, but there's actually no story of her. The only thing we actually know for a fact is she followed Jesus. She was a follower of Jesus. The whole Dan Brown, like the Dan Brown book,
Yeah.
that got a bunch of Protestant. It's weird. It got a bunch of Protestant Christians all upset, but all my Catholic friends really loved the book. It's funny because it
The Da
was,
Vinci Code.
yeah, the Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown's series of work, 'cause he did the Da Vinci Code, Demon and Angels, and stuff like that. Eastern Orthodox and Catholic circles really enjoyed that book. It was weird to me because it was like, but they're criticizing the Catholic Church. I mean, it's
And they basically say that Jesus, had an affair with, Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene
yeah. I mean,
and
but
had children that would still walk among us, which is completely wrong.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, if you really wanna look at it, from it is possible. It's a possibility that he was married. He may or may not have had children, but in order in as far as Jewish culture goes, it wasn't uncommon for rabbis and very spiritual people to be married. There were prophets that were married. There were one or two prophets were married. I mean, it was almost a requirement for that. So I mean, there's a basis but it's a story of fiction. And first and foremost it is a story of fiction. It explores.
Well, another thing that was common back then was also for religious people to forego sex at all, and live a celibate life, and granted, how Jesus was very, he was very much against, you know, um, you know, he was very much like, against, being rich and, giving into temptation. You know, we can say, we historians generally, from all I can see that it's just more likely that he just never had sex at all. He mainly focused on his mission at hand. Although, it is possible.
I mean, it's possible either way. We don't actually, have a.
Well, we weren't there.
Yeah, we weren't there, and we don't have we even then we don't have a full account. I mean, because paper is brittle, papyrus,
Yeah.
and even clay tablets.
Although I think of something funny.
Not everything that
Um,
was written down has actually survived up to now. So it's I say it's still a possibility either way. There's no definite absolute answer to that one.
yeah,
But I mean it's but Dan Brown's work is work fiction, and it's
yeah,
not it doesn't have truth to it. There's no evidence that shows it, but it could have been possible. It's an interesting thought experiment. You know,
yeah. I mean, I kind of find it funny if you really think about it, because, like, let's just give Dan Brown the credit, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, Jesus did, have a child with Mary Magdalene and got married to her. Technically, I wondered if that would affect the Trinity at all.
I don't actually think it would, because it's just that would it'd be what it's um essentially if you want to go through it a Nephilim that God allowed to survive for some reason. I mean, because there could be a reason that if that happened, because Jesus had brothers and sisters. He had brothers at
Yeah,
least. So Mary wasn't an eternal virgin,
yeah.
despite what some Catholics believe. She wasn't. It even
It
it's
directly states that, there's actually been some discussion amongst scholars, like, not all of them take it, granted, but, the secular scholars especially, they take it that, that even Jesus was not, they deny the virgin birth. And they, what they ultimately say is because the reason why is because, like, when you date the gospels and stuff like that. Well, I mean, dating is hard, but they say when you go in the correct accepted order that we do now, like, you get Paul's writings, you get Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. Um, it's not until, I believe, Matthew until you get, the virgin birth story. Mark doesn't really bring it up, and Paul never mentions it.
well,
Paul, in fact,
it's mentioned in Luke. It's mentioned in um John.
well,
The
yeah, I know that, but I'm saying, like, in order of dates.
Yeah, I mean, but again, you have like this questionable validity of the earliest point. It is the earliest point of time that we can see it. Really, you know, is that when the earliest time it was written, or was that when it happened? Because there's still oral traditions within Christianity, just like in Judaism. Between there was a gap of time.
Yeah.
Like an entire generation before.
Well, I mean, the
It's like
earliest. yeah. I'm sorry.
Several
I'm saying,
generations.
yeah. Well, the earliest sources that we have dates back to Paul, and it's not Paul either, but it's a source of Paul that Paul drew from. Um, we
So
can date,
basically the student of Paul, because
yeah,
that's what the ancients would really do. The students, when the students would take up their teacher's work and take the name of the teacher. This one of the reasons why um, every single Pope John Paul is called Pope John Paul. Their name actually changes to John Paul. Um, it doesn't matter what they're born as. When they die as Pope, they're died as Pope John Paul, whatever. You know.
and like what I was saying is the earliest sources that we got, for Jesus's life comes from Galatians, I believe 1:10 or something like that, and it has Paul saying something about how he gets this source material and his time in Jerusalem, and we can date that. If you want to be very generous to the if you want to be really helpful to dating it early, you get 3 years after the crucifixion. If you want to go late, you get 8 years. So we got a span of 8 years for the source that Paul did, and we know that that the story of the resurrection and stuff had to have come early on. So, because we know that they practiced what Paul was none about, they'd already had a creed and everything up already set for a while. So we're talking about several years, which is amazing when you think about people like Alexander the Great, who didn't get a single biography written on him until 400 years after the facts. But with Jesus, in fact, we got at bare minimum about less than 10 years.
That's written documentation, because
Not written
I thought
documentations, but
I thought I thought my as far as biographies go, as far as the Gospels go, that was
well, the
100 years.
earliest source that well, Paul would be considered our earliest source of Jesus. Um, Paul came if we just take Paul for for what he is, and the earliest time that he did it would be 25 years.
Okay,
Um,
okay, I got you.
but his source material that he went off of predates him, and we can say with certain facts, given certain lines of evidence, that it had to have been at least 8 years, at most 8 years since Jesus' crucifixion. So we have, I'm just saying that's amazing because we have far less historical knowledge on some well or more, people that we would expect more knowledge on than Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, but you also have during that time different things going on where truth was actually speaking truth was not only accepted but required. Like some of the things that happen nowadays, like the intellectual dishonesty and
Yeah.
trying to propagandize certain things. If it was found to be false and you were a historian, more than likely you would be put to death for it. Um,
Yeah.
because it's not just the religious aspect of telling a lie. It's the social aspect of telling a lie. It's the social
Yeah.
aspect of misleading people that the ancient people just did not like.
Well,
This
you have to take into consideration that these people were not individualists like us. They were collectivist.
Well, they weren't fully collectivist. I mean, individual. There was a I think balance of collectivism and.
Well, they lived in honor shame culture, an honor shame culture with a collectivist, feel to it. So I mean, their society. That's why I always tell like these fundamentalists and stuff that these people like that wrote this, they lived in a completely different philosophical time period than us. And
Well, or
I tell this
it's
to
not.
some atheists too. You know, they have to take into consideration that this, the book was not written in an individualistic society. It was written in a collectivist honor shame society. And we have to take it on, we have to look at it from that aspect of it. You know, we would really do that with any other ancient work. Or hell, even works that date back only a couple hundred years, we do the same thing. So it's only fair that we take into consideration those things, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm still going to resist they were collectivists, because I think there's a definite the whole free will, individual, the individual mind and stuff like that. All those theories, existed in this time. So
Oh yeah, I mean, well, here's the
we
thing, but
had
well,
a
here's the
they had
thing,
a
yeah,
sense of individualism, but it was also during a time where we had to work as a team or we weren't
yeah,
going to survive. So it was. I think it was less of a collectivist society because when you say collectivist, let's be honest. People already. Yeah, I don't think that's an opera. Just the sheer number of people who demonize the term and has changed the term. I don't think that collectivist is our modern concept of collectivism. I don't think is applies. I think it's
yeah.
more.
Well, I mean, of course things change, but by collectivists we mean like they thought of the like what was considered good to them was way different than what we consider good to us. You know, because for being you, we tend to be individualist because that's the society we've been born up in. What is good for us is basically what is good for us as the individual. Back in their time, that wasn't allowed because, if you thought only good about yourself, that would be very dangerous. Like, that could kill you because you had to think of the group. You had to be willing to go without. You could not, it wasn't that you couldn't have your own personality, you couldn't be unique, but you had to be, you were who you were a part of the group.
Yeah, and which is why I think it just sounds more like teamwork. Especially knowing how harsh it was back then, and it wasn't just harsh by weather, and because we had to invent houses to protect us from the wind, to protect us from the from all that. But then you also had we also had a lot more predators
Yeah,
that all over the world that we do now. I mean, so there was more of a need to work as a team. There was more of a need to you know look after your neighbor as you're looking after yourself in order to survive, because you're only alive as long as the guy next to you to the left and right of you is. Essentially in that type of environment where every single action is about you know survival, because
yeah,
nowadays we're you know we don't have to worry about survival. Not really. I mean, even as even as a homeless person and stuff, you're still doing um you can survive.
yeah. I mean, it's just better society than we used to. Um, so yeah, it's just my point is like we have to take into consideration history and try not to mingle our own you know personal values that we consider now into these texts.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Well, it is getting kind of late, and
Yeah,
we have been talking about about this for quite a long time.
yeah,
I mean, it says we started streaming 3 hours ago, so I mean, it's 1:20 now. Um, so but it was good talking to you. It was definitely good talking to you. Um, we should do it again sometime. I'm gonna try to get other. I'm gonna try to actually um put this in, maybe not this exactly. I'm probably gonna cut it up and stuff like that, but and cut this part out of the video. But we'll probably get more people within the Facebook group at least. Um, but it was good talking to you, Mr. Brass. Do you have any closing any closing thoughts other than you know?
um, I just want to say that it was good talking to him. I want people to know that deism is not that much different than Christianity or Judaism in of itself. We just have a different way of looking at God and His purposes for us. And I just want to say the atheists, dogmatic atheists, that they need to lay off of us for that, and we can come try to come to even grounds. Um, Once again, I had fun talking to you, and I hope we can do this again and maybe discuss more philosophical issues.
Oh, I hope so too. I mean, you know, but all right. Thank you very much. And next time, God bless.